For 25 years, nothing has tasted better after a hard day's work than a Mike's Hard Lemonade. It's because since day one, Mike's has been making lemonade the hard way. We use 3 kinds of lemons, all hand-picked from family farms, then blended to perfection and cold-pressed to create the epic hard lemonade you know and love. Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Mike's is hard, so is prison. Don't drive drunk. Premium malt beverage with flavors. All registered trademarks used under license by Mike's Hard Lemonade Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 119 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back, welcome aboard. Welcome to the crossover event of the century. Today I am speaking with Shirlz Jocelyn of the Canyons Are Calling podcast. And we've agreed to do something that we hope is fun for everyone listening. We are appearing on each other's podcast simultaneously. So after you have listened to this great interview with Shirlz, you can head over to the Canyons Are Calling podcast and listen to her interview me. An easy way to do that is to take a look at the show notes for this show. You'll find that link to my interview and also numerous links to everything we talked about in the show, but also recommended episodes of her podcast. A link to the most recent video that I released to the Go Get Outside podcast YouTube page. And also a sponsor link for Dynamite Starfish. If you remember Dynamite Starfish from years ago on this podcast, Leslie Kim designs climbing clothes, and she is a climber. And I have a code in there where you can get 10% off of her products. And it helps out this show if you do so. I recorded this discussion with Shirlz at her home in Kanab back in March. At the beginning of a multi-week road trip I was doing across the United States to record episodes of this podcast and also do a variety of other things like hike the Lost Coast Trail. And if you are a canyoneer or a person interested in podcasting, this is the episode for you. We go super in-depth about everything involved in podcasting, the realities of producing a podcast, pros and cons, all of that, and also deep into Shirlz's history in canyoneering and also working for Imlay Canyon Gear, which is basically the preeminent gear manufacturing specifically for canyoneering. So why don't you come now with me to a windy night in Kanab at the home of Shirlz Jocelyn, where we talk about all things canyoneering and podcasting.
I live by routines, especially my same-day delivery routine with Shipt. Because when Sunday rolls around, I'm not scared. I got my shopper on the way with all my favorites. Shipt, delight in every delivery. Learn more at shipt.com.
Hey, I am Shirlz Jocelyn. I go by Shirlz Rocks. I grew up in Manti, Utah, then lived in St. George for a little while, South Dakota, moved back to St. George just because Zion was there, and that's where I got into canyoneering. Then from there, I moved into Virgin, was working at an outfitter in Zion when I got offered a guiding job in Kanab, which was like my dream job, guiding canyoneering trips and just hiking, basic hiking and stuff. And so I took the leap and moved over the mountain to Kanab, and the guiding job fell through about a year and a half later, and I started working for Tom Jones and Imlay Canyon Gear, and I have been managing Imlay Canyon Gear for about 9 years now. In 2001, I started the Canyons Are Calling podcast.
So that's a bunch of ground we just covered. And of course, as you probably know, because I know you listen to this show sometimes, I never let anyone just waft something by and then jump ahead into the future. So you hit a lot of ground there. Some of the important points is I know you're a canyoneer. and you have been a guide, and that you work for Imlay Canyon Gear, which we will discuss that. Some people listening, if they're not canyoneers, might not be familiar with that company. If they are canyoneers and they're not familiar with that company, they haven't been paying attention.
Right.
You're definitely a canyoneer. Is that your primary outdoor pursuit, or are you a multi-threat generalist?
Yeah, basically a canyoneer. I do some hiking, tiny bit of backpacking, and some gardening.
Some extreme gardening?
I'm doing medicinal herb gardening this year.
Medicinal herb gardening.
Yeah, with my body getting old and falling apart because of my job, I have gotten into medicinal herb healing, and it is working. So after my shoulder being locked up for a year, it's finally relaxing because of herbs like hops and St. John's wort and echinacea and chamomile. And so I'm going to try to grow those this year, and I'm taking 2 different herb schools.
So I think there's a pretty good chance your boss, Tom Jones, is listening to this. Is he paying for this garden?
Well, he pays my wage, which pays for the garden.
All right, I guess we'll let it go then. But yeah,
So
maybe he should help pay for some of these seeds, since apparently the backbreaking work he has you doing is destroying your human body.
He does help pay for physical therapy, so that was great.
All right, well, I guess we won't say bad things about Tom right now.
Not yet.
Okay. As we covered, your primary outdoor pursuit is canyoneering. And where is it that you said you were born?
Manti, Utah. It's kind of central Utah, on the middle of Highway 89. A lot of people know Richfield. If you're going to like the San Rafael Swell and you hit Salina, you would exit there and head north about a half an hour.
So it's that part of Utah that I have spent very little time in, because I'm one of those people who has managed not to hit the Swell, not to hit North Wash or any of those areas over there. I've mostly done canyons in southern Utah.
You want to hear a funny story? So it came up on my memories on Facebook that 12 years ago, I purchased my first canyoneering guidebook, which was canyoneering in the Swell, and I still have yet to go there.
Oh, that's okay. I have Grand Canyoneering, and I've used it once and referenced it a few times for trips that didn't happen.
I mean, Grand Canyon's hard.
Yeah,
I understand
it is.
that.
It
It's
is
in my
indeed.
backyard, and I've only done the easy stuff there. So
You do live in Utah. You were born in Utah, so it makes sense that you would become a canyoneer, because for canyoneering, for especially drier desert style canyons and even some wet ones, Utah is the place in the U.S. Even people in other countries are aware of Utah for canyoneering. So tell us how you ended up stumbling upon canyoneering and getting into canyoneering. From a young age or much later in life?
it was later in life. It was in 2011, I think. It was after I had moved back from South Dakota, so probably 2010-ish. I had moved back from South Dakota because a relationship failed, and like I knew about Zion, and I knew that Cafe Rio was close by because my sister loves that restaurant and we would always stop there. And so I just leapt and moved to St. George. Didn't really know anything about it. There I met a friend that was a climber and was trying to teach me how to climb, but the arthritis in my hands would make it really painful for me to climb. And so I could do a couple of 30-foot pitches, but my whole arm would be burning, and I just didn't really love it. And plus the view is kind of the same, like all day long. And
Definitely the view would not be, I mean, there are amazing views climbing, but yeah, the view, changing views is less of why you would decide to be a climber.
Yeah.
If that's what you're looking for, then yeah, maybe not your sport of choice.
so he had been invited to do Spry Canyon with a friend of his, and he was like, hey, I have this friend that's pretty badass, can she come along? And they had an extra space for me. So my very first canyon was Spry Canyon in Zion. My body, like I couldn't walk for 3 days after because I was using all these muscles in my legs and my back that I had never used before. But I was so addicted by what I saw in the canyon that day. And I have insomnia, so I would just spend all night like researching canyons in the area. And I saw like Birch Hollow and Pine Creek and Inglestead and all of these amazing canyons. And so I'm like, we got to do these. And so I was just the bug in the group that was like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And I remember one time they're like, let's do a canyon in Zion or around the area that doesn't need a permit for once. Because we'd done Behunin, we had done Pine Creek, of course, we had done a bunch of them, Keyhole. And so they're like, your choices are Inglestead, because you didn't need a permit for Inglestead at that time, or Birch Hollow. And so I look at the beta and I was like, well, Inglestead has a 300-foot rappel. Like, let's do that one.
And if I remember correctly, you pass it before you would get to Birch Hollow anyway. So it's kind of on the way, isn't it?
Yeah. And so we get to the 300-foot rappel and I'm like, oh my God. Like,
and before this, you'd only done Spry?
No, this was probably my fifth or I had done less than 10 canyons by then, but I had done more than Spry.
And so what were you looking at it? Like,
I think my tallest rappel had been in Behunin, and that's like a 200.
Okay. So enough that you'd hit something substantial.
Yeah.
Where you already faced that, oh shit, that's really tall, and I'm going to go down this fear for the first time. But now this one's even longer. Yeah.
Because I don't know if you've done Inglestead, but when you look at that,
I've looked down into it.
It's just dark, and you know that first rappel is 300 feet, but right after that you've got another like Honda. It's just boom 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 rappel, and that canyon, it looks intense from the top. And I
hiked by it to go to Birch Hollow years ago, and I did look down into it, and it looks like it could be a pretty amazing experience.
It's fucking incredible.
So this is like around your 10th canyon, and you get to do a 300-foot drop into Inglestead.
Yeah, and it was just, I knew that was where I would find my therapy and my happiness.
This is around 2011, 2012-ish, or somewhere around there at the time. And we're going to get some nerdy descender talk. So for people who aren't canyoneers, I hope they still listen. All of the descenders that exist now did not exist. Most of them did not exist yet.
Yeah,
so
none of them.
What were you using at that time? A Piranha?
Piranha. I learned on a Piranha. And my friend also just got an ATS.
Something to worry about when you're doing a 300-foot drop is you're going to have all that friction at the top, and it's going to seem really hard to get started. And then the closer you get to the bottom, the faster you're going to get. So were you doing any sort of Z-rig or anything like that? Or
we did have a fireman's belay on the bottom that would, he would be able to slow you down if you were going too fast. And then we stop on the little ledge and then add as much friction as we can and do that last like 100 feet.
Right.
And I have always found that has been, I guess the 3 times I've done that canyon, that's how I've done that canyon. And I'm really comfortable with that, because by the time you get to that ledge, you're going pretty fast. And so to be able to stop there and add your maximum friction and then finish that last 100 feet, I feel is really, for me and my nerves, really good.
Yeah, so how was that canyon? You get thrown into the longest wrap you've ever done. You're going to have to stop on this ledge and adjust friction, and then you're going to come down. What was it like when you got down that first wrap and then continued on with the rest of that canyon?
I mean, it's an incredible canyon. There was my first keeper pothole in that canyon where we had to get like a boost out and some assistance to get out of a pothole. Wetsuits definitely important, even in July. I remember where I was like, it's 100 degrees in St. George right now, and there's ice right there in that corner, and like this big snow bank thing and stuff. Like, that was kind of mind blowing to me, but now I get used to it in the desert. But yeah, it was just such an incredible experience, and every canyon I have done since like Imlay and some of those canyons just reiterate the fact that my joy is found in these canyons for sure.
And you said this was friends who took you on Spry, right? So you didn't go with any sort of guide service or anything like that. You had met people, experienced canyoneers. They brought you out for your first trip. And are these the same people you continued to go out with for
Yeah, we had a really good group of a solid base of people that we called ourselves the Z Crew. For a while, but it was a solid like 5 guys and me for a few years. So shout out to like Josh and Brian and Rick. Like, Rick was the main one. Rick is a lawyer, and he would like double test everything, and he would encourage us to practice things. And so he's the one that inspired me when I moved to Kanab to start like skills days and knot nights, because we used to do that when I lived in St. George. Like, my group would get together, we would go to Dixie Rock and just practice rappelling, and we'd practice, like, it was before I knew what it was called, but the courtesy rigging, where you like the first person goes out on the extra webbing, and then, or the last person, but everybody else gets to go at the anchor spot. But we would practice being the last person going out on the extended webbing and things like that. And so to me, that was a normal part of canyoneering and friends. And when I moved to Kanab, I didn't have that. And so me and my friend Nick kind of established a group where we would just get together and practice canyoneering techniques and invite locals so that we could teach other locals. And then that's how I met a lot of my Kanab friends and my Kanab base here.
And so are you one of those people that basically learned your skills from other canyoneers, or did you at some point start taking courses? Or
I did learn a lot from canyoneers, and then I started working with Tom, and then I learned a lot from Tom. So I honestly have never taken a course.
So Tom has come up in conversation a few times, who is the owner and founder of Imlay Canyon Gear. He's going to come up again, which if he's listening, he's so excited to keep hearing his name.
Right.
So for those people who aren't canyoneers or who somehow have never heard of him, why don't you tell people a little bit about who Tom Jones is and what Imlay Canyon Gear is? So we'll just get that out of the way.
Let's see. Tom is one of the, I guess, godfathers of canyoneering. He calls himself the emperor.
I bet he does.
He and Rich Carlson started the ACA, the American Canyoneering Association, and then
that sounds right.
Later he broke off from Rich and went to the Coalition of American Canyoneers.
So from the ACA to the CAC.
The CAC, yeah.
So you have ACA, and then just replace the letters with each other, and you have the new.
And then you have that.
Yes.
So because of politics, they split apart. But Tom then started his company called Imlay Canyon Gear, and it started basically as a company that would help you with hooking gear to get out of Imlay Canyon. And so his first product is actually a product that we don't even sell anymore, called the Happy Hooker.
When did you stop selling that? Because I feel like
before I started working for the company.
I feel like maybe it was just listed on the website and wasn't available, because I feel like I'd come across it at some point. But regardless, continue.
Yeah, and so that was just like a hooking device that would kind of like telephone out and let you, when the potholes were empty in Imlay, be able to hook out and get to the anchors. Now I feel like more people, like there's holes drilled in, and more people do different style of hooking to get out of Imlay, so they don't need the telephoning extension. Yeah, so we don't sell that anymore. I started working for Tom when he first started working with China to make his packs. I want to say it was like 2012. And at the time I only really knew that Imlay had really good quality packs, and my friends were waiting for them for a really long time. And I had moved to Kanab to guide for this company, and it was kind of the end of the season. And Tom had posted that he needed a part-time person to work for him to like help with these orders, because he just got these new backpacks in. It was the most tedious thing I had ever done in my life. But I was a single mom needing to make some money for the winter and happy to work for Tom Jones, right? Fangirl, I had met him the first time we had done Walker Canyon, like the year before in 2011, with some good friends of mine, Everett and Lewis.
And for anyone that's listening that's not aware, that is a canyoneer, and they know about all these different canyon companies who make bags and ropes and packs. Early on, it was basically Imlay Canyon.
Imlay was the beginning.
Yeah, if you were in the U.S., that was your choice. Imlay Canyon Gear, everything was built also kind of with the intention of you would be using it in the Colorado Plateau area. So it's very much focused on desert-specific canyon-style packs and ropes and things.
Yeah.
And yes, so at that point, to be working for Tom, you're pretty much working for the only person that's doing this. The only canyoneering gear
company in the United States.
Right. And for people who also don't know this about Tom, he also used to guide, or maybe he still does, for Zion Adventure Company, correct?
Yeah, he doesn't guide it there anymore, but yeah, he used to be one of their main guides.
And he is the guidebook author for Zion. So if you have ever bought the Zion Canyoneering book, that was Tom's book. It is Tom's book.
Yep, for sure. And so we had been doing work through Shanghai until COVID happened. And when COVID happened, our backpack order got denied. But that kind of opened the door for a lot of these other companies to be able to come in. And so since COVID, like Slot, the Desert Canyon bags have come in, Gear Perspective has come in, Glacier Black has come in, and they're all designing, backpacks, rope bags, rappel devices, things like that. So I do feel like COVID was good in some ways for other companies, even though it didn't really hurt us. It just stalled our backpack production for a couple of years. We're back now making everything in the United States. So a lot of the stuff is either made here in Kanab, Winslow, Arizona, or Colorado City, Arizona. So with that, we have a lot more control of different sizes as well as colors. And so we're making like the Collab pack, which is our most popular pack, in 4 different sizes now. So you have like a short person, a medium person, tall person, backpack, and then a variety of colors. So that's pretty exciting that we've been able to do that.
And for a while, Imlay Canyon Gear was just Tom, right? So it was when he put that ad out that you became the second employee or first
So there was
employee.
one other lady. There was Heidi that was working for him. Okay. She was doing what I was doing for him then. And I was just kind of doing tedious production work at first. And then Tom had Grand Canyon River trip for 30 days. And while he was on the river, Heidi had this opportunity to buy like a 400 square foot cabin on like 80 acres near Cortez, Colorado. And that's where her family is from. And so she was like, I'm taking this job and I'll train you with what I know, but I'm not sure if Tom's going to hire you. And so she was only going to be there for a week after Tom came off of his river trip. When we told Tom what was going on, he was like, of course I'll hire you, because not only am I desperate, but you also have canyoneering knowledge.
Not only am I desperate, what a resounding vote of confidence.
But I don't really think he said that, honestly. But
well, it is now on the record that is what he said. So whether he said it or not, it is now what he said.
No, but Heidi was just a hiker. She wasn't a canyoneer. And so when there was questions about canyoneering, she couldn't answer them. And so at least I had kind of that background. And yeah, we've worked pretty okay as a team for
9 years. Yeah. So I guess the desperation turned into
he's still really desperate. He keeps me on.
So tell people what you do for Imlay Canyon Gear and what the days of work look like there. Because from what I recall, the one time I went there, it's basically out of Tom's house. And for those that don't know, out of a chicken coop in the backyard. Is that still the case?
Yes. We've got more chickens. We have these cute little bantams now that our friend Cameron gave us. We have a little worker cat, Tulip, that keeps us in line. But yeah, it's still out of Tom's house. I do all of the shipping. So if you order anything off of Canyoneering USA, I ship that out. If you go into a gear shop and you buy anything from them, say Desert Rat, Summit Hut, Out and Back, IME up in Salt Lake, there's a lot. We just opened one in South Dakota, Final Frontier, so that's kind of cool. Ask, Tower Supply in New Mexico. We have places all over. Even in Australia. So if you're in Australia, you can get Imlay stuff. I send that to all those people. And because we're doing a lot of production in the United States now, I am cutting out a lot of your backpacks and rope bags and cut all the webbing and things like that.
So for anyone who's buying gear, if they're pleased with the gear, you can thank Shirlz. And if you're not pleased with the gear, it probably wasn't her fault.
Yeah, it was Alex. If it was messed up, it was Alex for Tom. And if it was done right, no, I'm just kidding.
All right, so we jumped ahead to just explain who Tom Jones was and Imlay Canyon Gear, and then we've spent all this time talking about Imlay and Tom. So you're welcome for the commercial, Tom. So let's rewind back to where we initially were, which was you got into canyoneering. You did a number of canyons with your friends. You did Inglestead, and that was an amazing experience. And then you continued to practice with everyone. And then at some point, you start working for Tom, but it's somewhere in history you also start working as a guide. Which happened first?
I was working for a guide first, and then started working for Tom when the guide job kind of fell through.
So let's talk about how that came about. How you go from a person who hasn't done any canyons to the person that's insomniac, sitting up at night, just thinking about them nonstop and won't leave your friends alone so that you keep going to do canyons nonstop with them, to becoming trained as a guide and then being paid to take people out.
Yeah, so I met the guy Nick, and I was working for an outfitter shop in Zion, the base of the Narrows. So we met in the shop, and he just was like, I need an assistant or a part-time person. Do you want to join my crew? And so at first I was just guiding for him.
Did he tell you that he was desperate?
No. Okay, he was just like, if you want to, it would be really cool to have you.
So this was not out of desperation this time.
No, it was just like, you seem like a cool person, and you love canyoneering, and I love your passion about the outdoors. So you'd be a cool addition to the crew.
And honestly, I mean, there are a lot of things that are really important for a guide to be able to do. Passion for the outdoors and super stoke all the time, that's got to be way at the top of the list, because you want those people paying to go out to do that activity to see how excited you are to do it, so that they can also be excited to do it. So when they get scared,
they're like, yes, well, she's excited to do it still. So maybe I'm not that scared. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely helps.
Right. So this guy's like, okay, maybe we'll hire you part-time and then let's continue from there.
It worked out that I would work for him like Friday, Saturday, worked for the outfitter like 4 days a week and did that for a while. And then I lost my job at the outfitter. First job I was ever fired from, but I don't really want to get into that story.
All right, we'll just blow right past it.
Sometimes when you cover your ass and you get fired anyway, I don't know why they fired me. Anyway,
we'll move past that. We're gonna stick with some more questions about the guiding.
So then I got to start guiding full time instead of part time, and that to me was like the best ever. When you have a person who is completely scared to do a 30-foot rappel, but by the end of the day, the 110-foot rappel is their favorite part of the day. When you get a kid that's completely scared of a thunderstorm that just frequently rolled in on you when it was a 20% chance of rain that day. And that was his favorite part, like the changes in people throughout the day in the canyon to me was way better than any paycheck that I could ever get. And like, I totally did not do it for the money. I did it to be outdoors and meet incredible people. And it was amazing. And then life happened and my job was getting more part-time than I could handle it. And so then that's when Tom had posted the thing about needing help.
So let's talk about the guiding a little bit more. So you're probably taking people through the same select canyons, right? Because you don't want them to be too difficult.
Yeah.
You want them to be more accessible. And then just for convenience, you're going to want to hit the same ones so that you can always know what you're getting everyone into. So what were those canyons that people were... Also, are you guiding in the park at all? Or are you having to do everything on the periphery?
No, you have to do everything on the periphery. Zion National Park, the only hikes that you can guide in Zion legally, you have to pass a test through the park. And then it's like basic hikes. Like you can guide somebody up the Narrows to the Orderville Junction, but you can't guide somebody from the top of the Narrows down, which is the more technical part of the canyon.
And way more fun.
Right.
Yeah.
You can guide somebody on like Canyon Overlook. You can guide somebody on Angel's Landing up to Scout Lookout, but you can't go on the chains. And that's where most people need the help. You can't guide somebody through Pine Creek. You can't guide somebody through the subway. Really, like the places that you actually need a guide in Zion, you can't get a guide in Zion.
The places that everyone wants to do and people who maybe are ill-prepared.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate for this search and rescue, I think. But
so then what canyons are you taking people through? Birch
so we did,
Hollow?
Birch Hollow a lot. We did Diana's Throne or the Huntress outside of Kanab here, Rock Canyon. We would do that a lot. And then we have a couple secret canyons here in Kanab. We call it the Hangover, and I think they called the one the Lunchbox or something. But and it's more like cliffoneering, more like Sedona, where it's not really like slot canyon-y, but long rappels.
And so did you get to that point where you said, man, I'm really sick of doing Birch Hollow for the 100th time?
I love to do Birch. It was Diana's Throne, the Huntress. And we actually found the little side drainage of the Huntress. We called it the dark side. Now people call it the Hunted or something. And so it would be fun when people want to do like an extension and a fuller day and go over to do that canyon.
And if I'm correct, since you're having to guide people from outside the park, when you get to the end of Birch Hollow, you have the option to, I think, cut right and exit and still remain outside the park, or cut left and go down Orderville.
We could never do that.
That's what I figured, which is probably unfortunate. Though probably also fortunate because it would extend your day so much.
Yeah, it would be a really long day we would do... Sorry, I just had a random thought.
No, please continue your random thought.
It would be a really long day with clients to go all the way down Orderville, and it's much funner with friends. We would also guide the East Fork of Fat Man's, which is way more beautiful than the West Fork of Fat Man's and not in the park boundary.
So you mentioned earlier that when they hired you on, they were looking for somebody. They weren't desperate. They just thought you had a great attitude.
Wonderful personality.
Did they have any sort of test you needed to pass? Like, how did they vet you to make sure you had the skills?
I did a training day with Jonathan Zambella, who was one of the founders of Zion Adventure Company. That was really... I also did a woofer wilderness first responder class before I had worked for Nick. So I just did that because once I got into canyoneering, one of my first trips down Orderville, when we got to the confluence of Orderville and the Narrows, We ran across a party that told us that there was a girl who had fallen from the last rappel in Imlay and broken her leg. And one of my friends was a first responder, and so we went up there to try to help, but her leg was shattered, and she was already kind of experiencing some shock symptoms. So what we were comfortable doing was giving her like an emergency blanket to keep her warm, making sure that she had like food and water, but we didn't want to try to move her because we knew that the Rangers were already on their way, and the way that her ankle was just like powdered, basically, it was so broken. That made me realize that that can happen to anyone in my group too. And I'm not always going to have, Rick with us, and I'm not always going to have somebody that's trained in first aid. And sometimes we're way back in the middle of nowhere or everywhere. And so my friend and I decided to take the woofer class, and I had kept that current for like 9 years. I just let it lapse a couple years ago.
Yeah, and the woofer is the Wilderness First Responder, which is the more intensive version of Wilderness First Aid.
Yeah, it's super intense.
Was that a requirement?
No.
No, okay. Because I feel like that would be super important for any sort of guide.
I feel like
it
was
at least Wilderness First Aid.
Yeah, Wilderness First Aid was definitely a requirement. And I feel like because I had the first responder, he was even more like,
right,
this
you
is
exceeded expectations.
Yeah. Even to be like a non-canyoneering guide, you have to have Wilderness First Aid.
And so how long were you a guide?
For about 2.5 years. I was part-time for a year and then full-time for a year and a half.
So that's a substantial amount of time. I'm sure it's mostly seasonal. Most people are coming at certain parts of the year. I imagine probably spring and maybe even late winter maybe out here.
Yeah, spring and fall.
Spring and fall.
Yeah. Kind of slows down a little in the summer and then...
Yeah, because it's 113 degrees.
And monsoons are scary.
So it's a substantial amount of time. It's enough time to go do these canyons numerous times, to take out numerous people. Did you encounter any situations where you had to put that woofer to work, or where you had to deal with someone who did something foolish because they either weren't paying attention or they were particularly scared, or someone that got hurt? Or did you have any sort of instances like that, or did you have a super clean record for your 2.5 years?
I was pretty clean. The only two things that come to mind, one of the times that we did the East Fork of Fat Man's, we saw like 4 rattlesnakes. A couple of them were babies, and they were all in different spots. And so just knowing how to get around rattlesnakes in a tight canyon was really beneficial. I think the assistant guy that was with me was able to like put his backpack when we were in the tight canyon, put his backpack in front of us and kind of herd the snake out of the canyon until it got wide enough that we could all go around it. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. And then the other time I had it was 2 girls from Las Vegas, so it was just the 3 of us. And we were doing Diana's Throne. And if anyone has done Diana's Throne, that's like an experienced canyoneer. It is a really easy canyon. All of the rappels are very angled and like fluted. And so it's the perfect canyon to train people in. And I've taken little kids, I've taken 80-year-old people through this canyon. There was this, she was probably in her early 20s, and we get to the first rappel and they have to do the shot for the Instagram. Like, we're badasses, we're doing this canyon trip. And we get to the bottom of the rappel and she was so terrified. She didn't want to do any more rappelling. And I'm like, from here, you have to do at least one more. And we spent 20 minutes practicing rappelling. I set up an anchor on this kind of sidewall so she could just kind of practice like getting the weight on and like lowering, and she's only like 5 feet off the ground, so she's not going to hurt herself. And once she got a little more comfortable, we went down the next rappel, but she was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I cannot go any further. And so it was the first time that I just had to do this early exit out of the canyon.
Oh, so at least that was an option in that case.
Yeah, it was. Like,
in many canyons, the option would have been, okay, you're either going to do that, or we're going to have to all spend the night here, which is going to be far worse.
Exactly, and the helicopter is going to have to come and whatever. But yeah, so I still continue to feel like that is the perfect place to train beginners. And now there's so many guide companies here in Kanab that sometimes on my way to work, I'll see like 10 cars in that parking lot, but it's a perfect place because there's so many exits in and out of that canyon. And I was really grateful that I could just kind of navigate and get back to the car. It was kind of a steep climb out, but for her, it was better than continuing to rappel.
You've grown up in Utah. It sounds like you lived in South Dakota for a bit, but for the most of your life, it sounds like you've lived in Utah in some regard, right? And you got into canyoneering in the desert out here. Clearly, you've done plenty of stuff in this region. Have you expanded out? Have you taken your canyoneering pursuits to other states,
I've
other
gone
countries?
to Uray twice, and I went to Costa Rica right before the pandemic happened. Like 2 weeks after we got back from Costa Rica, the United States shut down.
Well, I guess that was good timing.
No, I wish we would have got stuck there. Costa Rica's amazing. Yeah, but that's about it. Oh, Arizona too. I went to the Arizona Rendezvous last year, but I was only able to do one canyon because of my body, so that was lame.
So you're a desert canyoneer at heart. So Uray can be quite different than desert style canyons. So what was your experience there? You went twice, so it sounds like you enjoyed it enough to want to repeat it.
I love Uray. I need to go like a week ahead of time because even though I live at like 5,000 feet, I have a hard time breathing at 9,000 feet. And I get a really bad headache for like 3 days. But the canyons there are so much different than the canyons here. Just with the water flow, the rocks, the topography. Yeah, I really like it there. I'm hoping that I can get back there this year too. Because I just didn't go last year because my body was so broken and it doesn't make sense to go that far if I can't really do anything. But
did you go for the annual rendezvous?
Yeah.
Okay, so you went for each of the rendezvous. For those people who know the area and are interested, which canyons did you do out there?
I would say Bear has been my favorite one that I've done. It was just really incredible. I did Middle and Lower Oak, and that 170-foot rappel in Lower Oak is amazing. I really want to get back and do like Upper Uncompahgre.
Yeah.
The 1 year that we did it, it was super low flow and it would have been perfect, but it was also the first year that we had really experienced Class C canyons. And so we thought it might be a little bit above our experience level. And then the next year we went, it was super high flow. And my friends went, and my friend Becky like almost died because she got like pushed under because of the turbulence or whatever. But she was like, it was so incredible. And so Tom and I were supposed to go with a guy named Tyler, but when Tom went and saw the flow, he was like, we're not doing this canyon today. And so we ended up doing Lower Oak again. So I really need to get back and do Upper Uncompahgre and Corbett. The second year I was there, I was supposed to do Corbett, but because I was saying I have the acclimation headaches, the more I hiked to get to that canyon, the more my headaches started getting worse. And so halfway up, I decided to turn around and just wait for my friends at the bottom. But they had an amazing time. So this year, my goal is to hit Upper Uncompahgre and Corbett.
Do you ever take Diamox or ibuprofen or anything to try to combat that?
I haven't tried Diamox, no.
I mean, I've never tried it either because I am a cheap person. But what I do when I'm going to be at elevation, and it mostly has worked for me, is take like 2 ibuprofen prophylactically each day for like 2 or 3 days leading up to it. And that has, for the most part, helped. I've done that like when I've gone up Whitney, when I did the JMT.
Okay.
I would just take, for like the first week or so, I would take 2 ibuprofen every morning.
Interesting. Maybe I'll try that.
It was something I read so that you don't have to get the prescription for the Diamox. I don't know if it's truly working, but it seems like it is, and it might be worth trying.
Yeah, for sure.
If that gives you an issue.
I also might want to research some herbs that I could try.
That's right, in your special herb garden.
Yeah. See if the herbal medicine, because ibuprofen messes me up, and that's, my doctor told me to take 4 ibuprofen and 2 Tylenol to help with my shoulder pain.
There you go.
So many issues.
There you go.
Like,
Ibuprofen might help for
that.
multiple things.
Or just mess up your system.
Or mess up your system. One or the other. Who knows?
But maybe Willow. We'll see. I'll do some research.
Before we move on from this Uray conversation, you did mention your boss yet again, and I want to say that I have done Cascade Canyon partially with Tom before, and my friend Alden has a photograph of Tom holding a Canyon Works rope bag.
What?
He tried to hurry up and get rid of it before he got the camera out, but
I bet
it exists.
That'd be cool to see.
All right, so how do you feel about the Class C canyons?
I mean, they can be intense, but I am a fish, so I like water. I would like to do more of them. I'd really like to get out to California and do some in the Sierra or up to the Pacific Northwest and do some of those in the Olympics or the Cascades. But
so that's in the future, but not yet.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend it, yes.
Like, unfortunately, my stupid shoulder and arthritis in my whole body, but that is getting better. So
What if you get a really tight, thick wetsuit? Would the pressure of the wetsuit possibly help?
I feel like I've gained enough weight that my wetsuit's probably going to be pretty tight. Maybe you're onto something there. I should try it.
So in the time that you've been working for Imlay Canyon Gear, after you stopped guiding, what has your canyoneering experience looked like from there? Do you continue to be the person that stays up at night, can't go to sleep, and keeps thinking about canyons, or have you slowed down a little bit?
I did slow down the last couple of years only because my body doesn't let me do the physical things. I am healing that because canyoneering is my therapy. Like 2023, I barely got to do any canyons at all. And the ones that I did do were like easy canyons, repeats. Like I did Keyhole, which is, for people that don't know, like a 2-hour canyon with a big group. One of the easier wet canyons in Zion, one of the classics. And it was so physically painful for me that I was like crying at the end because it shouldn't hurt that bad to do that short of a canyon. I have learned, and one of the people that I interviewed was like, why don't you concentrate on the canyons that you can do? And so if I just do the easy like I can do canyons where it's a long hike and I'm doing long rappels. Like I could totally do Behunin and Spry. It's just the physical ones that cause me to use my shoulder and my hand, my thumb. The last part of 23, I've been focusing on that and then just rebuilding my shoulder so that hopefully, by the fall, I can go out to North Wash again and do some of those canyons, because those canyons are really fun, but really tight and really physical.
So what do you think the draw is for you? Because there are tons of things you could do. You could just be out hiking instead, or you, like we talked about, you could have decided to be a climber if the hand arthritis wasn't an issue, or a cyclist or anything else. What is it specifically about canyoneering that entices you so much?
I tried to ride a mountain bike and I crashed really bad and had to leave my camp trip like 3 days early and get rocks out of my hand.
You can also ride a bike on the road. It doesn't have to be on mountains.
So I gave up bikes then. People are like, you get hurt canyoneering, but you don't even care. I call them canyon kisses. I don't know what it is. There's something about just being in areas where only the brave and bold go. The people that you meet and the teamwork, like you can go to a rendezvous and meet somebody for the first time, and by the end of the day, you're just best friends and stay in contact with those people for life. I've never been in a sport or in a community where that happens. Yeah, like I said, when I was guiding, the changes that people go through throughout the day are just incredible. You face your fears and you overcome them, and you just feel like such a badass by the end of it. It's addicting, like probably the best addiction I've ever had.
That insinuates there have been many others. Speaking of fears, which you brought up, and speaking of how you've had to deal with people in canyons who had fears, when you did your first canyon, did you experience those fears? Are you a person that has any sort of fear of heights or anything like that?
Yeah, I feel like when I stop getting scared of heights, I'll probably stop canyoneering, because that keeps you aware when you're at the edges. Once you get locked in, you kind of feel a sense of security, especially once you have tested that gear and you know that it's going to hold you. The first time you clip a carabiner in this tiny, like 1-inch piece of webbing and put your weight on it, it's kind of terrifying. But the more you do it and the more you practice with it and the more you know the equipment, it's more of like a sense of security, I guess. And so you are just a little bit scared, but also the thrill of it and what you see, that's what makes it worth it, in my opinion.
Your first was Spry. What is the first? Because I've never done Spry. What's the first drop like in Spry? It's
a pretty angled, I want to say like 160 feet. Like it's pretty big, but it's kind of angled. So it's not a straight down drop.
Right, it's not fully vertical.
By the time you get really vertical in Spry, you're already used to it and kind of addicted to rappelling. I do remember one thing that stands out with my first trip in Spry is we traversed over to this one edge because my friend Yua didn't want to get wet. And now they call it like the comb, and there's this area where there's like so many rope grooves that it looks like a big comb, and you drop into this pothole that always stinks and you always have to swim, but it's like, I don't know, 20 feet across the stinky part, and then you rappel out again and then you're done. The first time we did that canyon, we didn't do it that way. We like went across this tiny little crack, and then we were on top of this knob that was super standy. and we were holding on to like roots of a tree. And I remember being so scared to death and being like, get the fucking rope over here and drop that so we can rappel out of here before we all fall and die. Like I used to do spry every year so that I could see how not only the canyon has changed, but how my skills have changed. And every time I get to that point, 12 years later, I feel zero desire to go do that rappel again. I'm always like, let's go down into the stinky water. It's not that bad. We can shower when we get home.
Right.
And also just the erosion issues that it causes if you go that other way are not worth it.
So that first drop's 160 feet, which sounds substantial, but it sounds like it starts out as an angled slab and then slowly makes its way to vertical. So as you're going down it the first time, did you feel intense fear? Because you don't have to walk over a lip, which a lot of people's first rappel, they have to walk over a lip, which is the part you always have to walk everyone through. Like, okay, now lean back a little bit. Okay, rate the rope. Okay, spread your legs out a little more. Okay, now just slowly walk back. Let your upper body pull you over. You don't have to do all that because you're walking backwards down a slab.
Yeah.
But did you still experience like that fear by realizing how far you're about to go? And then the other thing that scares people is the gear. Because you were talking about you're going through that webbing, and until you've learned to trust webbing, it just looks like stupid tape that you're hanging on.
I think because I had been trying to learn how to climb for like a year before that, I kind of already had trusted the webbing and stuff. The thing that was really weird on that rappel is as you're rappelling, you're going down to the right, but the water course and the way that the rope really wants to go is to the left. And so if you go too far to the right, it's going to pull you back to the left, and you're going to do what's called a pendulum. Yeah. And I have seen that happen before. And I think my first rappel, I was mostly like excited. I was a little bit scared, but I was really excited. But then I was really nervous because as I was rappelling, they were explaining this pendulum thing to me.
Oh boy.
So then when I got to that part, I kind of freaked out a little bit, but it was just so exciting to me. And then in Spry Canyon, you've got probably 12 to 15 rappels in your day. And so you start out just past the tunnel on the east side, and you start up this drainage, and then you hike up the sandstone, and then you drop way back down again, and then you start with that 160-foot rappel. It's mostly in the red sandstone, but then you get to this spot where you rappel down and everything's black, and then you get to this spot where there's just all these boulders, and then you get to the spot at the very end where you get kind of like the Chinle area, and you get kind of like some purples and greens and reds in there, and then you do your last rappel, which is all free hanging. I think it's like 80-foot free hang. You can see the tunnel and all the switchbacks and stuff. And then you have this huge boulder field all the way back to your car where some of the boulders are bigger than houses. It's like a big playground to me. It's just like jumping from big rock to big rock or like sliding down. And every time you exit, it's a different route. And it's just so much fun.
When you did that free wrap, was that the first time you had done a free hanging rappel? Mm-hmm. So what was that experience like for you? Because that can be
pretty scary at first because that was I feel like we had already done some of the high angle rappels before then, but you only have like 12 feet of wall, and then it's just all free hanging after that. It was a little bit intimidating, but I just learned that you just lean back until your feet fall off of the wall, and then you're just like in a swing. And as long as you have enough friction, you just kind of slowly let yourself down to the ground. It's pretty fun.
So is there any part of canyoneering you don't like that you would like to just excise from the activity and remove?
Probably the long approaches.
I knew you were going to say that. But that's the part that you said your body can withstand.
I love going downhill better. But yeah, you're right.
I know what happens for me sometimes is if the approach is really long and hot and really steep, I will look like I am dying by the time I get to the top. And then as soon as we drop in, I'm better.
Right.
My energy returns, especially if there's water. As soon as I touch the water, it's like all my energy returns. But on the hike up, I think, I don't know if I can do this fucking thing. I might die before
I'm going to turn around. I'm just not going to go. That's totally what keeps me out of Death Valley. Like some of those approaches are like 3,000 feet.
Well,
like
Grand Canyon also. Yeah.
Yeah, Grand Canyon too.
I mean, the Grand Canyon, you might actually have to hike out of the Grand Canyon.
And with the Grand Canyon, you have to have your backpack gear and pack rafts and all that shit. It's a lot.
Do you have any interest in those sorts of multi-day, or have you done any of those multi-day canyon adventures?
I haven't done multi-day canyons yet, no. The canyons I've done in the Grand are like Soap and Badger, which I don't really know if they count. I mean, they are in the book, technically. But.
Yeah, if they're in the book, they count.
And then I've done backpacking in the Grand, like Thunder River, and I've done the Rim to Rim.
Down Bright Angel and Kanab. You get into canyoneering 2011. You like it so much you eventually become a guide. You still like it so much that you start working in that industry for a living. And then that's not enough for you. At some point you say, not only do I want to have guided this, help create the gear that people use to do it, but now I want to interview and talk to people who do this with their free time, and you decide to start a podcast. So let's talk about that. Why did you decide to start a podcast specifically about canyoneering?
With working for Tom, I do a lot of tedious tasks. Like I pull all the ropes and cut ropes. Now I'm cutting backpacks and rope bags. And I was listening to a lot of other podcasts, like hiking podcasts. I listened to your podcast. I found yours because I was trying to search for canyoneering podcasts, and you actually got to interview Tom. So
I can say that some people think that my show is a canyoneering podcast, even though it is not.
You have interviewed several canyoneers.
There are a lot of canyoneers because I know a lot of canyoneers. But yes, this show that you're listening to right now, people, there's often canyoneers on it, but it is not a canyoneering podcast. Because what happens is some of the canyoneering people I know, they only listen to episodes with people they recognize their name, which just happen to be canyoneers. So then they think the podcast is just canyoneering.
That makes sense. Now you do
but
a lot.
Yours
You do
is just canyoneering.
Yeah, you do a huge variety, which I like. That was awesome. But then when COVID happened, you stopped doing your podcast.
I know, I'm a lazy ass. So wait, were you picking up the slack? Is that what happened?
Yeah, well, I needed to fill the niche because I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I love canyoneering. And so I just thought maybe other people would like to listen to canyoneering stories too. And so I decided to do the interview style, considered just doing accidents, kind of like Ashley with the Sharp End podcast does with climbing accidents. But then I was like, I don't know, like if that many people really want to talk about their accidents.
I think you made a wise decision by not doing just accidents for a number of reasons. Number one, Sharp End is specifically mountaineering and climbing related, which is a sport, activity, recreational, whatever you want to consider it, that is much larger than canyoneering and encompasses people more so than by far more than canyoneering. So it's already potentially a large audience to draw from. Canyoneering audience smaller to draw from. Yeah. But also because of that, if you're only focused on the accidents,
everybody's going to be scared of canyoneering.
Off people who might be interested in canyoneering and then getting into it. Right. Whereas based on what you were talking about earlier, I think you're more the person that wants to get people stoked to be a canyoneer, or else you wouldn't have been a guide for 2.5 years.
Exactly. And so when I was considering it, I remembered when we were in Costa Rica, it was a rainy day one time. And so we decided to go to the hot springs with the Toros group. And while we were there, they told us about the volcano that they outran. And it was shortly after they had reached out to Tom to be a sponsor for their gear. And so Tom had sent them a bunch of the Imlay Canyon Gear backpacks and ropes and rope bags and stuff. And they were trying to do this first ascent of a canyon near the volcano. And the story was so incredible. And I was like, you guys need to do a documentary about this or something. And so when I was thinking about who I could interview and what types of stories I wanted to tell and what types of, things where I wanted the podcast to kind of go, I reached out to some friends, that had been in accidents. And I got Everett on to talk about his husband, Lewis, that had passed away. And Nick and I talked about some of our guiding trips. And I reached out to them to talk about their canyoneering, their volcano trip. And then the longer it's gone on, I'm starting my 3rd year now. More people reach out to me and are like, I have this story about this flash flood, or I had this story about this thing that happened, or I have this guide company, or I just wrote this book. And so it has transformed into something way bigger than I ever imagined that it would be. I've met a lot of people and it's been a ton of fun.
So let's talk about how it began, because just when I got here, you were talking about how technical things, electronics and such, production work, not your forte, not things you're familiar with.
Yeah.
So you had the decision, hey, I should do this podcast, but you can't just immediately do that. Granted, it's pretty easy these days to make a podcast, but there's a lot of technical things that need to happen. So what was that process like for you? How did you research and find out what you needed to do and then integrate that?
That was 6 months of YouTube University of me just doing a lot of research at first to figure out if it was something I really wanted to do, if it was something I could do. I'm kind of an introvert, so for me to talk to people is I love it, but also it's kind of weird for me. So I get a lot of anxiety about talking to people.
I'm going to tell you a secret that's not completely a secret in the world of performers. More performers are introverts than extroverts.
Interesting.
Everyone assumes that all performers, actors, everyone are extroverts. In my experience, that is not the case. So
that makes me feel a little
basically,
bit.
Yes, you have good company.
Because it takes a lot of my energy to do this. And at the beginning, I would record the intro like 25 times to get it to sound right. And now I'm just like, it's good enough. I don't give it. I think it was the How Not To guy, he was like, it's perfectly good enough or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay enough for sure.
So YouTube University teaches you what you need to know. Yeah.
So I thought that I had learned a lot and I would totally be able to do this on my cell phone. And so the first probably 5, 6, 7 episodes are totally recorded on my cell phone. And a couple of them were like in person where I just like...
Do they have to be in person then? Or were you also able to
sometimes
over
I
the
was
phone or
able
something?
to record it through my phone somehow.
Okay.
I think I totally don't remember because I remember I was in St. George recording the episode with Nick through the phone. I met Everett when we did his and I just put the phone on a rock between us and we recorded into that. I mean,
so you weren't even running microphones off Oh, wow. So you were just using the built-in microphone on the phone. How
100%
how did that turn out?
I mean, you might want to listen to the first few episodes. They're probably pretty shitty.
That's okay. I made the mistake of listening to some early episodes of my own podcast recently, and I think it has improved a lot from those episodes.
Yeah, I just got a compliment last week about the quality. So
all right, well then that's good. It's good to know that it's moving upward.
Yeah.
That is the trajectory that you want.
Yeah. So 6 months in, I decided to buy a laptop, and so then I was recording through like Google Meeting because I honestly can't figure out Zoom because I'm that technology stupid.
You're doing remote recording at that point?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah,
then
mostly I was doing remote.
With the microphone on the computer? Mm-hmm. Okay, which also still going to have some
really
issues.
Sucks.
Right.
So then I decided to do a Patreon thing and have help get some sponsors or whatever support. And with the Patreon support, I got a Zoom podcast recorder. And so now I have microphones and
for people listening,
editor.
People listening might be confused. A Zoom recorder is not Zoom that you're thinking of. It's not the meeting software that you use on the computer. Zoom is a brand of audio recorder.
Recording equipment.
You can plug microphones into it, which means that you had to buy microphones also.
Yes. I can plug up to 4 microphones, but I only have 2 so far. But yeah, that really upped my audio quality. And I've been using that for about a year now.
So what has that learning process look like outside of technology? Because technology is just one part of the process you've got to learn. Mm-hmm. Then there's that whole other people skills.
Yeah, learning how to control
know.
conversations and ask questions that people will want to, like I have to think about what my listeners want to know when I'm interviewing a person.
Right.
And ask the questions, like even though I know the answers or whatever, I need to make sure that I'm asking the questions that my listeners want to hear the answers to. And it's been pretty fun. I wing most of my conversations like we are today, and it's been great.
One of the things that people don't take into consideration also that you, I'm sure, had to learn is how to ask questions so that people will give you a long answer.
But not too long of an answer. Yes.
Right.
100%.
But you have to be very careful not to ask a question that already is answered so that the person just says, yes, that is true. Or yes.
Yeah, open-ended questions.
Right.
Not, yes or no questions. And that's been an interesting challenge.
And so did you just learn that 100% just from experience and then looking back and saying like, oh, I could have done this better, I could have done this differently? Or did you do any sort of YouTube University for that also?
No, mostly I just wing it and ask what feels natural in the conversation.
And then after you record all this stuff, you have to edit it.
That's honestly my favorite part of the whole thing.
Is it?
No.
I was going to be very surprised if it was.
No,
yeah,
not
before
at
we
all,
started this, we were talking about what that process was like. So when you were doing it 100% off your phone, were you doing any sort of additional editing to it from there? Or did that come later?
I feel like I had to because I was trying to get rid of like the dead space. And
how are you going about doing that?
I don't remember. It had to have been on my phone somehow.
So,
because I didn't have a laptop for the first 6 months.
Oh, wait. Okay, so
I
this
had
is
zero computer.
This is very interesting to me. So you would record it on your phone.
Yeah, edit it
on your phone.
Yeah, all through like Anchor.
And then upload and write your show notes, create your RSS feed and all of that over your phone.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
That's
to me.
why the first probably, 10 episodes are really horrible. But, but I enjoyed it and I was having fun. So I felt like it was worth the investment to upgrade for my fans,
So once you got the laptop, you were like, wow, I have all this real estate to work in,
Right.
which must have been a big improvement.
I can see the dead space. It just totally delete it at a time.
Being able to see a waveform is the most beautiful thing when you're editing audio. You've probably done this at this point. You can recognize that is an
Yeah.
That is the shape of an
Yeah.
That is clearly
so you can,
dead space.
Get rid of some of the stuff. It doesn't take quite as long, but it still takes a long time.
Yes.
Like you have to listen to your stuff a few times just to get rid of all this stuff.
So when you moved to the laptop, you had mentioned earlier you were using Anchor, correct? So were you doing your editing through Anchor at that point?
I used Audacity and then put it onto Anchor.
Okay, and Audacity you learned how to use through YouTube, or?
Yeah, they also give you tutorials and stuff.
And so when because they want you to use their product.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that post-process. So to get ready for a podcast, you've got to do all that pre-communication, get people to come agree to be on your show and get all that set up. And that takes a little bit of time. And then the recording, of course, takes its amount of time. But then what some people don't realize is the post can take more than all of that earlier time combined easily. Mm-hmm. So when you're preparing an episode, what do you think that post time takes you?
I would say if the interview is an hour long, it probably takes at least 4 or 5 hours to edit it and get it all ready, add the pictures, add the show notes, all that stuff.
That's one of the things I think people don't realize. A lot of people I think, and actually I think some podcasts are done this way, where people just record it and spit it out and upload it, and then you can usually tell because when you listen to those, this happens. So tell me about this. Well,
right.
Yeah. And then it makes the listening experience not enjoyable at all.
Exactly. There's sometimes I'm like, is it worth it taking out all of this dead space and all these ums? And then when I do it, I'm like, that episode is 15 minutes shorter. Like it was totally worth the 4 hours I put into it.
So one of the things,
flows better.
And it makes it so much more listenable a lot of the times. And then it also makes your guests sound good.
Exactly.
Which makes it a positive experience for them.
Right.
That's one of the things that I think about if I'm sitting there and I've spent 8 hours on an episode. I think, man, should I really have spent all this time? And then I think, well, hopefully it's going to make that person who was on the show happy that they came on the show. And this is a thing that will exist theoretically, permanently. And so I want to do my best to make sure they sound their best. So with those things being said, what kind of feedback have you gotten both from the audience and then also from people who have been on your show?
Honestly, canyoneers, in my experience, are crickets. The little bit of feedback that I have got is people are just like, I love your show. I did get a little bit of feedback about the audio, but I have worked on that, so I feel like it's gotten a lot better. I feel like if I do get a negative comment, I'll probably cry a lot, but so far I haven't gotten one. Which, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. I know I'm just a person and I'm not awesome.
Do you feel like you have a sense of when people have come on the show, how they feel about having been on the show afterwards? Like, do people give you feedback who have been guests or ever say like, oh, that was fun, or oh, I'm glad I did that, or I wish you didn't. I have heard that
people have reached out to people that have been guests on mine and they've been really respectful and really awesome and really supportive. One girl that's coming to mind is Natalie. She had, I feel like it was either lower salmon, maybe jump, but she broke her back in the canyon on rappel. But she said that she got a lot of positive feedback from people that reached out to her after the show. And actually I had both of them. Tina was the one that went with the stranger, and Natalie and Nicole, who had fallen in Seattle. And we did, all 4 of us did a kind of like how you stay positive while you're healing. And, like when you get in an accident and the canyons are ripped away from you and you can't do the things you love anymore, like how does life move forward from that? And so that was an incredible one.
What do you think are the positive things you get and have gotten from doing this show?
Especially the last year when I haven't been able to do the canyons, it's been at least able for me to meet more of the community and still feel like I'm involved in giving back to the community. and just learning more about the canyons that I can't see and motivating me to heal my damn body so that I can get out there. You know what I mean?
Are there any negative things that have come from doing the podcast, or anything that was just unexpected that you didn't foresee? Like, oh, if I do a show, this is going to happen, or I'm going to have to deal with this. Any sort of negative impacts?
I think just like we mentioned before, like the time post-editing has been the one thing that I really didn't realize was going to take so much time. It's worth it.
So now describe to people what your podcast is. I'm going to do that horrible, terrible thing to you. Give me your elevator pitch for your podcast.
It's just stories about canyoneering, basically. We talk about what draws people to the canyons, what their favorite parts of the canyons are. I always ask about their favorite canyon snacks because I really like to improve my food and beverage.
Yeah, I've noticed you've got a little bit of a format there where you end with particular questions. Yes. Was that something you did from the beginning, or is that something you came up with later?
Yeah, I feel like because like you, with your podcast, you have the one question that you ask everyone at the end, and there's a few other podcasts that I listen to that kind of have that similar format. So it was just something that I've always done. I did change it from the first year. I used to ask people like if they could go anywhere in the world, where would they go and why? Even though I want to know like more places in the world to go, I wasn't really sure if other people loved that question. And so in the second year, I started asking how canyoneering has impacted their lives, because I know that it has completely changed my life and a lot of the friends that I have and know. And so that has been a more impactful and fun question. Although most of them are all the same. It's like the people that you meet and the places that you get to see.
So what do you want for the future of your podcast? Where do you want it to go from where it is right now?
I would love it to be able to be, I don't know, honestly, if I want it to be like huge. I want to get more stories out there so that people will think a little bit more when they're getting into these situations, do a little bit more research and be a little bit more prepared to get themselves and their group out of situations. Yeah, just to be able to, understand weather patterns in every area that they're going to go to, understand first aid issues that may arise, understand teamwork scenarios, and just build the community as a better, stronger community instead of a community that's divided by ego.
Is there anything about life, canyoneering, people, podcasting, any of those things that you feel like you've learned from this 3 years process of doing it?
Patience with technology, for sure, because that is definitely not my strong suit. Some people get themselves into really weird situations. If we all just slow down and have more compassion for each other and like build each other up instead of tearing each other down, I feel like that's kind of where like the whole world, not just the canyoneering community, would benefit. Hopefully, like people can hear some of these stories and be like, I don't want to be that person. They'll think more clearly when they're heading out on an adventure, or they'll listen, like Eric Moorcroft. We talked about the Sedona Canyons, and like there's a lot of native history down there and a lot of ruins that you're rappelling nearby or even down to. And so hopefully people will listen to that episode and respect the native history and respect the nature there. And, like I interviewed Aaron about Leave No Trace and what we can do as canyoneers to leave less of an impact on the land. And hopefully, people will take away some positives of those things and be more respectful when we're out there, because there's really not a lot of reason that we're leaving a ton of rope grooves, and there's really no reason that we have to walk across the crypto. And if we all can be more respectful, then places like, the Navajo Nation won't close down their routes.
So let's tell people the particulars. We already said it, but we're going to say it again. What's the name of the show? How do people get it? When does it come out? Let's tell them all those particulars.
So it's the Canyons Are Calling podcast, and it is on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you listen to podcasts, pretty much. I do have Canyons Are Calling podcast or Canyons Are Calling website, but no, don't do that. Don't go there. It's not updated.
All right. I'm not going to ask you to pick favorites or say who's better than who or anything like that. But what I am going to ask you is how many episodes do you have right now altogether? Do you know offhand?
Like 70.
70?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a substantial amount of episodes. So anybody new coming to this show wants to figure out where to start, right? And so they're probably going to look through and see if there's a title that looks really interesting to them, or if there's a person that they might recognize or they've heard of. But if you were to have someone come to you and say, hey, I want to start listening to your show, where should I start? Which episodes would you direct them to?
Oh man, there's been so many good ones. Like I mentioned before, the Costa Rica volcano story is just incredible. If you want to know about the Pacific Northwest, like I've interviewed those guys. I've also interviewed Jake Huddleston about the Himalayan canyons. They're doing a huge Himalaya project there that he's documenting. So those are good ones. I interviewed Ira Lewis about the Ouray Canyons. So you can hear about the ones that we talked about here. I have not interviewed Tom, so I'm going to try to get him on this season, but we'll see.
Hey, Tom, why don't you come be on her show?
Because I have to write questions. I don't do that.
All right, so those are some of the episodes people could start with.
If you don't know about canyoneering and you're thinking about going with somebody that you met on Instagram, Tina's interview was really eye-opening on that aspect for sure. Changed her life forever.
For people who aren't already canyoneers or who may be canyon curious, why should they listen to your show?
Just to get them stoked to see what's out there.
Has anyone told you like, oh, I'm not a canyoneer, but I listen to your show, or oh, I want to do canyoneering now because I heard your show?
No, that's interesting. I think I just mostly have canyoneering fans listen.
All right. Well, hopefully after this,
right,
we'll get some crossover. So people that are listening to this who are not canyoneers, but maybe are canyon curious, go check out Canyons Are Calling so you can find out more about canyoneering than just the occasional episode on this podcast that is not a canyoneering podcast, but often has canyoneers on it.
Right. And then when you get the stoke, let us know. We'll take it out.
All right. So before we get to the final questions, is there anything about your podcast that you would like people to know?
If they have any kind of cool stories about canyons that they want to share with us, or have anyone that they would like to have interviewed, they should reach out.
And how do they reach out to you?
Just thecanyonsarecalling@gmail.com.
All right.
Or also on Facebook, and I'm kind of on Instagram. On Instagram, it's Canyons Are Calling, but sometimes it takes me a while to find my Instagram messages for some reason. So Facebook or Gmail is best.
So now it's time for that final question that you already know what it is, right?
Oh man, now I'm nervous. But mine's the safety advice. What yours is just advice for listeners?
It's not even advice. It's just based on everything that we've talked about and everything that we've discussed. What is the final thought that you want to leave the audience with before we go?
I think that you should get outside. You should listen when the canyons call, and you should be respectful and try to leave as less of an impact as you can on the earth. Just be respectful and compassionate for your fellow canyoneers.
So with that, what? No, that's great. No, every time, everyone always says something great, even if they don't think it is.
Right.
And sometimes they pull something just out of nowhere that they didn't even know they were thinking about. When I started asking that question, I wasn't sure if I was going to keep asking it. And then as I went along and kept asking it to people, I realized how much good stuff came out of it. Yeah. And then I was like, no, I have to keep asking it. So you did great, no matter what you think.
Critics, right?
That's right. So with that, with us talking about how we critique ourselves. But no, let's go back to your final thought, which is everybody take care of each other.
The canyons are calling.
And the canyons are calling. Right. The canyons are calling. So let's go. So thanks for letting me come to your house out here in the middle of, are we still in Kanab technically?
We are Kane County. We are not actually Kanab.
All right. So Kanab adjacent. Yes. Thank you for letting me come out here to your Kanab adjacent home and for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I live by routines, especially my same-day delivery routine with Shipt. Because when Sunday rolls around, I'm not scared. I got my shopper on the way with all my favorites. Shipt, delight in every delivery. Learn more at shipt.com.
And now we've come to that part of the show where I invite you all to go to our website, gogetoutside.com. Look for this, episode 119 with Shirlz Jocelyn, and there you will find photographs of Shirlz in action and links to everything we talked about in today's show, including a link to my interview on her podcast. And while you're there listening to that episode of her podcast, don't forget to subscribe to her show. And should you want to contact us here at the show, if you want to tell me what you thought about this episode, what you thought about my interview on her show, what you think about anything pertaining to this podcast, you can do that a number of ways. You can send an email to jason@gogetoutside.com, or you can text us or leave a voicemail at 818-925-0106. And if you would, please go to your podcast purveyor of choice, make sure you're subscribed, rate and review the show, but most importantly, please share it with someone who you think would enjoy it. Next time on the show, come back June 1st for an in-depth discussion with Bill Sharpstein. He is an author, journalist, photographer, and creator and host of the YouTube channel, Mr. Hall's Trail Guide. We're going to talk about all of those topics: the Pacific Crest Trail, the Camino de Santiago, canyoneering, building your own home, and a variety of other interesting, insightful topics. So come back June 1st. Bill Sharpstein. See you then.
I live by routines, especially my same-day delivery routine with Shipt. Because when Sunday rolls around, I'm not scared. I got my shopper on the way with all my favorites. Shipt, delight in every delivery. Learn more at shipt.com.